Toyota and Honda get the big hybrid number in exchange for full throttle sounds like a blender discovering ice. Hyundai went the other way, real gears, real shift events, and 47 miles per gallon combined instead of the headline number. That's the blender tax. You're not beating physics, you're choosing which part annoys you. The first part of this hybrid powertrain driving experience is incredibly smooth. The handoff between the electric motor and the gasoline motor is very smooth, and we are talking about a different kind of drivetrain here, one with a conventional 6-speed automatic. The 2-liter 4-cylinder on its own makes 150 horsepower, and I think it's there to justify the brochure number of 192 combined. Below the mid-range as we are now, that gasoline motor just sits in the background quietly operating with a faint hum of a 4-cylinder. And it's only when you really ask it to work, just like here, and as revs increase, yep, we do hear that 4-cylinder. The good thing is that 4-cylinder sound is not offensive, and that's partly because it has to run through those 6 speeds. And speaking of which, the 6-speed automatic is pretty much the whole reason this episode exists. The competition uses electronically controlled, continuously variable transmissions that keep shift events out of the whole driving experience. But they also are able to extract between 48 and 52 miles per gallon combined. In contrast to that situation, Hyundai chose 6 individual gears and a torque converter for this car. The upside is acceleration feels like a car accelerating, not a washing machine in a spin cycle. The downside is a touch less efficiency because this thing has to shift both up and down the box. 47 miles per gallon combined is the price of admission for a transmission that acts like a transmission. In normal mode, or eco as this car calls it, these shift paddles control the level of regen, and there are 3 distinct levels. This is now the most aggressive one, and while you're on the move, it actually decelerates aggressively, which I appreciate, but when you approach a stop, it sort of backs off a little bit, and it's not a true one-pedal driving experience. In sport mode, however, the shift paddles are actual shift paddles, and between these 2 setups, it's a case of you having to tell the Sonata what kind of car it should be today. This Sonata will do an adequate 0 to 60 in 8 seconds and change, and that's a polite way of saying that the Accord might be a couple of car lengths ahead by the time you get to 60. The hybrid battery is a 1.62 kilowatt-hour size, and it's programmed to take you quietly on electric across a parking lot. Most owners call that the quiet part before the gasoline motor starts. Sport mode changes throttle and transmission mapping, and it'll actually happily hold gears longer than you would expect. So if you're enjoying this in the corners, it'll hold onto those gears and make the whole experience a little bit more sporting. As well, when you are controlling the gearbox manually, it does not hold gears all the way to redline. If you're approaching redline, it will indeed upshift for you. When you do request shifts through the paddles, that does respond, but it's not as quick as an Elantra N with the dual clutch, for example, and it's more aligned with how softly suspended this is, so there's a little bit of a delay both on upshifts as well as on downshifts. Subscribers get notified when the next episode goes live. Everybody else leaves it to the algorithm. If you want to see our next episode when it drops, well, that's what the subscribe button does. Steering's electrically assisted. It has a column-mounted motor assist unit. It's 13.2701 and 2.6 turns lock-to-lock. And I think that is the mechanical definition of not sporty. Thankfully, on-center feel is stronger than I would have expected, and assist is relatively light. You know it's electric. It is very much synthetic in that regard. Load it up into a corner and you can feel the weight build progressively, but that's more about weight rather than feedback. Turn-in response is immediate. It's not performance sedan quick, but it's appropriate for a midsize sedan in this segment. And the wheel tells you it's working. What it doesn't tell you is what's going on at those two front contact patches. Four-wheel disc brakes, which is what you'd expect, but of course there is regenerative braking layered on top of that. And like a good hybrid system, the blending between those two systems, friction braking and regenerative braking, is basically seamless. What I do find interesting, however, is the brake pedal itself. There's no nonsense here given that it's a hybrid, but the pedal feel is different. What I do get with this brake pedal is precise control and modulation, lots of stopping power. What I don't get from the pedal is much feedback. Full ABS stops are nearly drama-free, and the ABS intervention isn't there to annoy you in any way. It sits in the background waiting to happen when you need it. But because the suspension is on the softer side, there's a fair bit of dive under braking. Still, those emergency stops are flawless, and you've got a lot of confidence that you're going to be able to stop this Sonata in no time at all. This is perhaps the one area where the Camry and the Accord do a little bit better. They do give you a little bit more feedback from that brake pedal. The suspension is based around McPherson struts at the front, multi-link at the rear, which is basically the same setup on every other Sonata. At a little over 3,400 pounds, this is about 130 pounds heavier than the non-hybrid four-cylinder Sonata, but thankfully that weight sits low in the chassis. Funny thing, even though the suspension is calibrated for ride comfort over everything else, it actually corners relatively flat in the corners. It rolls a little bit and then takes a set. It doesn't roll excessively, which is not exactly what I was expecting. And regenerative braking does one thing in the corners that I wasn't expecting, and that is the moment you lift off the throttle, you've got more aggressive regenerative braking, so you're decelerating a little bit more, and it's actually more of a feature than a bug because you can control the attitude of the Sonata through the corners just with that throttle pedal. Hyundai's e-dynamic drive system uses the electric motor to manage torque when you're cornering. Hyundai gave the system a bunch of names as if it was assembling the Avengers out of understeer. On paper, it's a sophisticated dynamic chassis management tool. In practice, its interventions are so subtle that you don't even feel it working. What it does give you is a lot more confidence in the corners than you would expect from a Sonata Hybrid like this that's softly suspended. The system works, but because it works so subtly, proving that it works is another matter altogether. For this Sonata Hybrid, they chose a low rolling resistance 215/55/17 tire, and by nature, this is not the grippiest rubber on the planet. And it's around the absolute limits of grip where these tires show their low rolling resistance character. If you're crazy enough to lean on this car in the corners, the good thing is these tires give up their grip with some progressiveness, so you're not caught by surprise when you've exceeded the tire's limited grip. Ride quality, especially over broken pavement, and in the Toronto area we've got lots of that, makes a wonderful singular argument for this car's existence. The suspension is happy soaking up the bumps. The multi-link rear design just keeps the rear end planted, but on the other hand, damping is a little bit soft. It's soft on compression and on rebound, so over larger bumps you do get a bit of secondary motion. At highway speeds, it's very composed, very settled, very comfortable in terms of ride quality, but there is a little bit more wind noise than I would have expected. If you want to support the channel beyond just watching, the merch store link is here, and your support there means more time for us to produce episodes like this and a little less time worrying about industry access. No pressure, just an option. Forward visibility is excellent. There's tall glass all around. Rearward visibility, if you're the shoulder checking kind, might be compromised by those large C-pillars because the roof line is more fastback shaped than it is sedan shaped. But I don't advocate for that. Adjust your outboard mirrors, your rear view mirror properly, and blind spots aren't real. Still, there's cameras and parking sensors and a suite of safety features to make your parking lot adventures a little less dangerous. The seat itself is shaped for comfort over lateral support. Here it's heated and cooled, and it's very comfortable over long distances. I do feel that it's maybe an inch too high for my liking, but it still doesn't prevent me from finding a very effective seating position. Lots of adjustment in the steering column, and thankfully the instrument cluster isn't obscured by any part of the steering wheel. Speaking of which, the wheel is almost round shaped. There's a little bit of an odd shape at the bottom. Not quite sure why they do this, more for fashion than anything else, but the shape of the wheel encourages you to have your hands at 9 and 3, and the shift paddles are easy to reach with your fingertips. Spaciousness up here in the front row is very generous. Lots of headroom, as well as decent amount of headroom in the second row. Even with that sloping roof line, I've got a decent amount of headroom. And speaking of which, with the driver's seat in my seating position, I still have lots of room in the second row if I'm seated behind myself, if that were possible. In this front row, there's a decent amount of storage options, bottle holders in the doors, a couple of cup holders here, a bin here for random things, and a decent amount of space in the armrest. The trunk, however, is massive, and it's so massive, I'm not quite sure how Hyundai was able to package this with the hybrid and maintain a huge amount of space in the trunk. One feature that cleans up this area is by Hyundai putting the shifter on the steering column, and it frees up a lot of space where a conventional shifter would go. And here it just works wonderfully. I've seen this deployed over plenty of Hyundais, and it works intuitively. It's very easy to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and because it's electronic, when you've stopped, all you need to do to put this car in park is hit the stop-start button and switch the car off. Both the instrument cluster and the infotainment screens are clear and legible in all kinds of lighting conditions. The infotainment system is Hyundai's latest, works just fine. It's relatively easy to navigate if you need to adjust a setting in the car. I use it on Apple CarPlay and don't worry about it otherwise. The climate controls escape the forced migration into the infotainment screen, which is a good thing. The temperature adjustment is done with dials. The rest of this is all touch-based, and there's no haptic feedback here. If this episode gave you more information than a brochure or a press release, hit like. It tells YouTube to share this episode with other people like you interested in an episode like this. Takes just a second. That's what the Sonata Hybrid told me after a week behind the wheel. Here's what it's like after many months in your driveway. This is where the Sonata stops being a spec sheet and starts being a relationship. Every morning it wakes up, forgets your regen settings, and then asks you if you still care. 2 seconds, 1 paddle, daily commitment. The adjustable regenerative braking, the system you control with those shift paddles, resets to level 0 every time you turn the car off. There's no way to save a default, and multiple owners on Hyundai forums drove over 1,000 miles at level 0 without realizing it, silently hemorrhaging efficiency the entire time. One owner tracked the difference and found that simply setting the regen level at startup measurably improved fuel economy. The fix takes 2 seconds. The problem is that nobody tells you to do it. The second pattern that owners report is 12-volt battery behavior. The Sonata Hybrid eliminates the traditional lead-acid battery and integrates the 12-volt supply into the high-voltage pack. When the battery management system detects excessive standby drain, it isolates the circuit and the car goes completely dark. Doors won't open electronically, the dashboard's black. The most common drain source is Hyundai's own technology, the digital key system continuously polling for the owner's phone, and BlueLink telematics maintaining its cellular connection, which means the car can drain itself to death while searching for the person who parked it. The solution is a 12-volt reset button hidden near the steering column that force closes a relay and lets the hybrid battery jumpstart itself. Owners describe learning this procedure as an initiation ritual. Some perform it monthly, and that reset button is the kind of feature that feels clever right up until you need to know where it lives. Third, and this applies to anyone who lives in a region like me that experiences winter, that 47 mile per gallon combined EPA number, well, that's warm weather only. Owner data shows efficiency dropping to the mid-30s at temperatures below 5 degrees Celsius. And one long-term owner in the northeastern US reported figures in the low 20s during deep winter. The engine runs immediately on cold starts to generate cabin heat, and the lithium battery's charge and discharge rates slow meaningfully in cold conditions. Forum owners recommend heated seats over the cabin heater to keep the engine off longer. Nobody who reviewed this for a week in California is giving you this advice. If you own one of these or have some quality seat time behind the wheel of one of these, let me know in the comments what I got right and what I got wrong, because real-world owner experiences are much more valuable than anything I can learn in a week-long press loan, and I always read those comments. The Sonata Hybrid proves that a 6-speed automatic can eliminate that most irritating characteristic of hybrid rivals, full throttle drone. What it gives you instead is a car that feels more mechanical in every sense, shifts that you can actually feel, EV to gas transitions you can actually hear, and a brake calibration that gives the driver confidence. Whether that's worthwhile depends on how much of that CVT-related noise bothers you in the first place. The Sonata SEL Hybrid is for the buyer who's done the math. 47 miles per gallon combined, 13.2-gallon tank, and the $32,000 asking price, plus the 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty add up to a cost of ownership argument most crossovers can't touch. Sure, it's not as sharp as an Accord, and it's not as seamless as a Camry, but it is the hybrid for people who still want their efficiency delivered with actual gear changes. For drivers who hate that CVT-related drone more than they care about winning the absolute mileage contest, this is the answer. Park the Sonata beside a Camry or an Accord, and to some eyes, this thing looks like it costs $10,000 more. It doesn't, and the gap between Hyundai's styling ambition and its price point is one of the most compelling things about this car. It just happens to be the one thing you can't evaluate when you're behind the steering wheel. The Sonata Hybrid makes the argument that you don't need a continuously variable transmission to crack reasonable efficiency, 47 miles per gallon combined here. You do have to accept that this efficiency comes with a little more mechanical honesty, and on the other hand, the Camry will beat this one by 4 miles per gallon. That's the Sonata Hybrid. Subscribe if you want to see more episodes like this. Don't if you don't. Comments are open if you disagree, and the merch store link is here if you want to help fund more of these. See you on the next one.